So I think the really important thing is to be able to distinguish between commerce and capitalism. So commerce is the name given to the process of trade, buying and selling goods. Nothing wrong with that. That's been happening forever. I have something, you have something, we swap. What happens under capitalism is that it becomes an inequitable exchange. So I actually believe that is at its core. And that's where the origins of a lot of these challenges that ripple out from it come from.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented.
We all know first impressions count. Yet, rather than putting their best foot forward, most big-hearted, well-intended coaches are unknowingly starting their relationships with their prospective Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color clients off on the wrong foot by making statements such as the following. No. Where are you from originally? Wow, your English is so good for a Black person. Your skin tone is not dark enough. Are you sure you're from Africa? We have a scholarship program to support people just like you. These subtle yet gut-punching microaggressions can feel like death by 1,000 cuts for a person of color as they are continually reminded they don't belong. That is why I've put together a training called Microaggressions 101, where I help you to understand how to hold safer spaces in your online coaching business that will see you serve a wider and more racially diverse audience. For instant access, head over to anigishuru.com/LT. That's anigishuru.com, gichuru.com/LT. The LT is for live training, and you can find this link in the show notes. I've just had the most wonderful conversation with my friend Stephanie MacKinnon, and we were talking all things capitalism and how it is related to racism and all other forms of oppression. And this is a conversation that is so timely, and I'd love for you to listen. But before we get to that conversation, let me tell you a little bit about Stephanie. She is an internationally award-nominated certified life and liberatory leadership coach with an MA in adult education and 10 years plus of community facilitation experience. Stephanie supports both changemakers to unravel from the oppressive impacts of late-stage capitalism, to reclaim their joy and personal freedom, and business owners to identify and implement practical actions they can take to resist capitalism and make their business more accessible and socially just. Stephanie's work consistently invites curiosity, care, and compassion for her own and others' humanness, and the notion that imperfect action, aligned with our values, is crucial to creating the change we long to see in ourselves and the world around us. Here is Stephanie MacKinnon. Today, I am joined by Stephanie MacKinnon, who has become a great friend over social media. We've never met in person, but she has been a past student of mine inside my program, Represented, and I have been following her for quite a few years. And most recently, just seeing her emerge in what is now speaking to anti-capitalism. So, welcome, Stephanie.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here, Annie. And yeah, I can't believe it's been 2 years. I was actually looking this morning before we spoke since I took the program. So I'm excited to chat about the ways that that has continued to integrate into the work I do, in particular, as I continue to lean into and own this anti-capitalist perspective in the coaching work that I do. So,
Mm.
mhm.
I feel as though this is such a needed conversation right
Mm,
now, in particular, understanding the role of capitalism, because there are those who feel that it's not all bad. There's some good bits of it. I don't know
mhm.
how you feel about that. But before we get
Mhm.
into that, the guts of it, I really want to know, how did you arrive here? Because I don't know when you were, inside my program, if this was something that you were still exploring. But I feel like
Yeah.
in the recent maybe year or so, I've seen it more from you talking about
Yeah.
anti-capitalism. But how did you arrive here?
Oh, such a beautiful question. Thank you. It's interesting. I actually did a master's in adult education and community development. I'm from Canada, as folks will hear in my voice, but I live on the west coast of Ireland now, so I have a confusing mid-Atlantic accent, is what they call it. No one wants to own me. The Irish think I sound Canadian, and the Canadians think I sound Irish. Anyway, just thought I'd name that for anyone being like, she's not Australian, obviously.
Yes.
So I did my master's at the University of Toronto
Mhm.
in adult education and community development. So what is interesting to note is, like, yes, there's components of adult education that are about literally teaching literacy and numeracy to adults. But at its core, adult education actually has a very radical, and by radical, I mean questioning the root of things, not violence in any shape or form, origin. Paulo Freire is a really famous adult educator who was part of many social movements in Latin America, Brazil in particular, I think.
Mhm.
So my master supervisor was really, well, in her own field, a world-renowned Marxist feminist. So my critique of capitalism was deeply baked into my graduate education. And I wrote and actually published part of it. There's this whole pre-life where I like almost became an academic. Like, it was something I deeply considered. Yeah, so I wrote an undergrad, or not an undergrad, a master's thesis on the migration of youth from a rural part of Canada that I'm from, and looked at how capitalism had been part of creating this exodus and these challenges. So when I turned to the coaching industry, I felt like they were like two separate worlds. There
Mhm.
was like my academic self, and then there was my coaching self. And one of the things that really drew me to Beautiful You, who I trained with, and I know you're affiliated with, was Julie Parker's ability to bring social justice conversations in. So I was like, I could see the beginning of a bridge, but they really felt like two separate worlds. So for the last couple of years, it's been like, how do I find a space to bring these together? So it wasn't something I was talking about on my social media or on my website, but it was an exploration of bringing these pieces of me into a whole. So I
Ooh.
could talk about it so much more, but I'll leave it there for now.
I think this is so beautiful, and it's a great segue into my next question, because we are encouraged when we are studying to become life coaches, when we're training to become life coaches, is how can we bring our onlyness into this? What is something that we do that
Mhm.
that we're skilled in? How can we bring
Mhm.
that into life coaching and that be something that support us and that be kind of like our superpower? And I am
Mhm.
so excited for you that you found a way to merge coaching
Yeah.
and the, bringing in the lens of anti-capitalism. And for those who are
Mhm.
listening, going like, okay, Annie, we need to take a step back because
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not
yeah, yeah.
sure I understand what capitalism is in the first place. So,
Uh-huh.
in your own words, what is
Yeah.
capitalism?
Yeah, don't worry, I prepared for this. I knew that we would have to define it. So I think the really important thing is to be able to distinguish between commerce and capitalism. So
Mhm.
commerce is the name given to the process of trade, buying and selling goods. Nothing wrong with that. That's been happening forever. I have something, you have something, we swap. What happens under capitalism is that it becomes an inequitable exchange. So I actually believe that is at its core. And that's where the origins of a lot of these challenges that ripple out from it come from. So I do think there's certain supports that can be put around it that buffer the negative implications of it. But I do think that fundamentally it is an inequitable exchange. So capitalism is a system reliant on the extraction of surplus value from another's labor to create profit. So, in more plain language, that means that someone else or an entity with more power
Mhm.
is profiting off of the unpaid or underpaid labor of someone else. So, I've got a very simple example.
I was gonna say, give us an
Yeah,
example. I
yeah,
can
yeah,
hear
yeah.
this
Don't
like
worry,
I have
because
ideas in my head, but give us an
um,
example.
so there's a really simple example, and this might feel contentious to some people, but if you worked in a cafe, you are being paid an hourly wage, maybe some tips, but like at a bare minimum, an hourly wage. You are paid the exact same amount, whether that cafe has two people in it that day or 200. So you are doing 100 times the labor and you are getting the same amount of money. Now, that is a tacit agreement we have in the world that we live in right now. Somebody else has invested and put the risk up to create the cafe, but the question that very few of us actually ask is who has the resources to create that investment? Who has the support to do it? So, yeah, it challenges that. And then there's much more complex examples, or horrendous examples, like the American prison system. So I don't know if folks are aware, but within the American prison system, they produce so much stuff and people get paid like 14 cents to $2 an hour. That was The Guardian reported on that in 2022. And the profits from that system are 11 billion annually. So it's a horrendously stark contrast. And I think that that really connects into how capitalism is deeply interconnected with other systems of exploitation and oppression, which is where I think our work really connects. So even though my work, because of my area of expertise, is within capitalism, I really think it's important to acknowledge that it does not stand in isolation and massively disproportionately impacts those with marginalized identities.
Wow. This is
Mhm.
so eye-opening, Stephanie. What do you mean by, I came across the term late stage capitalism. What is that?
Mm. Yeah, so capitalism has been around for hundreds of years
Yeah.
at this stage. And I think it's important to also acknowledge a beautiful professor who I had the opportunity to learn from during my master's is a woman called Dr. Himani Banerjee. And she always talked about how this is a blip on the radar of human history. Nothing about capitalism is inevitable. There's certain things that we have to, we need to pay our rent or our mortgage. We need to buy our food. We are all tacitly consenting in this system to a
Mhm.
certain degree as a means of survival. So by no means do I want to ever shame anyone into feeling bad about how they participate, rather to like shed awareness on it and recognize the little moments of resistance available to us, and that there's other ways. So it's kind of made up. Like there's nothing, it's not like the weather, it's not like the rain, it's not like it doesn't have to be this way. But those who have vested interest in it staying this way, like Jeff Bezos, to name somebody off the top of our head, the Amazon, whatever we want to call him, owner. I'm just going to use another term that might not be appropriate on a podcast. So I'm coming back to your question, late stages. I really believe that as a system starts to crumble, as people start to see the leaks in it, and I think that's happening on a mass scale in many different ways around the world right now. People are going, this isn't working for us. The
Yes.
gaps between the haves and the have-nots are growing, but those in positions of power try to cling to it more and more. So it becomes more authoritarian, it becomes more intensified. And I think that the late stages of capitalism, we see that not only in the financial systems. So a lot of academics would say that, like, the 2008 financial crash, this like hyper, this is where we go a little bit outside of my area of expertise, because I'm like, I can grasp at some of the pieces, but
Yeah.
it's an intensification of what is. Like,
Mhm.
it's the doubling down on to try to cling to when people are starting to resist it. Yeah.
Ooh, there is so much. There is just
I
so
know, it's so much.
to
Yeah.
unpack. Let's go back to something that you mentioned before. You spoke about
Mhm.
overwhelm, how people are feeling overwhelmed. There's
Yeah.
a lot of decisions to be made. We still have to exist, and so we still have to
Massively.
trade and do what we need to do to survive.
Mhm.
Is there a way out? Is there a way we can do business
Yeah.
equitably? Is there a way we can do business in a just way? And really bringing in that lens from a coaching perspective for online
Yeah.
businesses, online coaching businesses, whereby we are very much part of an ecosystem that sells us scarcity, that sells us
Massively.
urgency, that sells us sometimes fear is used as a catalyst
Mhm.
to make you buy, guilt,
Mhm.
and a lot of times there is many things are not true. Many things that people end up buying. And I was part of a
Mhm.
call
Mhm.
very recently where somebody said they feel so harmed by the ways in which they have gone ahead and opted
Mhm.
into something, a freebie, a lead magnet. For those of you listening, I'm sure you know what that means. But when you opt in to get something, you exchange your email address to get something. Maybe it's
Mhm.
a PDF that's full of information, a video, a private podcast, something that gives you, information that you need, only to receive
Mhm.
it and go like, I could have Googled this. I could have figured this out on my own. What you
Yeah.
are selling is not a truth here. There's a
Mhm.
lack of integrity, and I feel
Mhm.
that in the person's words, they felt harmed
Mhm.
by that kind of system that we're a part of now.
Yeah.
What's your response to that, specifically being somebody who is a coach?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, thank you for taking what I inadvertently opened up to, like, the whole system of things, and bringing us back to, which I think is important to acknowledge, but bringing us back down to this overwhelm, this harm, this scarcity. And I think that that is actually so, so, so important, Annie. And I I think that what happens, one of the challenges within the capitalist system, is this sense of overwhelm, is this sense of powerlessness. And what I deeply believe is that as the collective, small actions by many can create significant change. But that's not what we're taught. We're taught this hero's journey. We're taught this one person needs to sweep in and do absolutely everything. So while I cannot control what inadequate things other people, or harmful even things that other people put on the internet to download, what I can do is move through the world with as much integrity as possible and remind others in my own sphere of influence that that is available to them too. So I think a lot of the work that I actually do as a coach, I've kind of come up with this term as like internalized capitalism. So how are we unraveling from, how are we challenging in our own work, in our own world, what this looks like, and inviting others in. And I think you named so many of those pieces in the beautiful question you just asked: the scarcity, the overwhelm, the guilt. I would add in perfection as well. We control what we can, but we don't underestimate the impact
Mm.
of that. Yeah.
We control what we can, but cannot underestimate the impact of that. I guess for somebody who is a business owner, an online business owner, just like
Mm.
yourself, listening to this and saying, you're hitting on something here, Stephanie. There's something, you're piquing my interest. This whole capitalism thing, I have never thought of it from this lens. But all I have
Mm.
ever known, how I have ever known to do business is through that lens of scarcity, is through that lens of urgency.
Mm.
For example, when you say, you know, freebies or these
Mm.
bonuses will be running out in 48 hours, only available to the first 5. I don't know if I'll ever be offering this ever again. So this is your
Mm-hmm.
potentially last opportunity to get on board. How then do people switch their script to something that is more inclusive, to something that is less, for lack of a better word, triggering?
Mm. I think it's really interesting that you ask it this way, though, Annie, because I don't feel that you do that. Like, I think the way that you show up as a business owner, having bought and participated in a program that you run, it feels completely the opposite of that to me. It feels deeply rooted in relationship. It feels highly connected to your values. And this is the other thing. And I know you teach this too. There isn't one right way. And capitalism has taught us that there is one right way. So I am very sorry to all the listeners out there. I do not have a magic 5-step plan for you. But what I do want to remind you,
Oh, shoot.
and this is, I know it's annoying. I I literally just put a freebie together, speaking of this, to help people identify what success looks like for them and how they can work toward that rather than what the internet has defined as that for them. And there's some stuff I'm talking to other folks about to actually put more programs together around that, but it's down the line. Go
I
ahead, you're smiling. You've got another question.
I love that. You had me at the freebie. You had me at the freebie of what success
Yeah,
looks like, that is removed from perhaps what we have been taught to see success as.
yeah,
Success is very much
uh-huh.
been tied to finances. Success has been
Massively,
tied to money. And so
completely.
that would be a freebie that would be so, so beneficial. So tell me a
Mhm.
little bit about it, and I'll pop the link in the show notes for those who
Very
are
good.
listening to get access to this, because yes, success is something that we are all chasing it in different forms. And how do
Mhm.
we know when we've arrived? How do we know when we
Mhm.
could be living in success and we don't even know it, because maybe what we
Massively.
think success to be is what the world is telling us is, but based on our
Mhm.
internal compass and values, we've probably already arrived.
Yeah, and yes, 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 yes. The world is telling us what it's supposed to look like. That was the piece. And often in that definition of what it's supposed to look like, somebody else is profiting off of you. So that's the piece, right? Like, who benefits from this idea of success? Who or what is lost? Because we see people hustling and sacrificing and doing all these things, but again, certain material realities are necessary for a comfortable life. And I do think that absolutely everybody is entitled to those. I don't want anyone to be self-sacrificing to kill themselves for the cause. That's not, I worked in community development and nonprofits for like a decade before transitioning into this work. And that is a lot of the folks that I support now. And oh, we could have an entire podcast on the problematic nature of how people are taught to self-sacrifice in those worlds. And I think that's an inadequacy of other supports available that is put onto individuals. That's how I'll leave that. But yeah, like, you deserve a beautiful life. Everyone deserves a beautiful life. But what I wish for people to be able to challenge is, who is that at the expense of? Like, what? Now, I am not going to overpromise that this freebie is going to change your whole life. Let me be very transparent. It is a handful of questions that get you dreaming and imagining what really matter the most for you, and then checking in to see if that aligns with how you currently define success. So getting clear on what a beautiful or an ideal or a fulfilled life would be for yourself and those around you. And then asking, like, look, does this actually line up with maybe the arbitrary definition of 10K months. Like, what does that look like? So can the material reality, can the things in your life actually support your life rather than your life being a pursuit of them?
Wow, that's powerful right there. And one of the words, and I've been having conversations with a lot of online business owners, and burnout has been like the big word
Mm,
2024. There are a lot of people who are just experiencing the fact that they cannot keep going at the pace that they have gone before, or just reaching a point
mhm.
where they just feel like, I've given everything, I am burnt out.
Yeah,
And I just need
yeah,
to take a few steps back. What are the things that I did at the very beginning of my business? Or how can I slow down, but still have an
yeah,
impact, still grow my business, still make a
yeah.
difference? And so, coming
Mhm.
back to this idea of being anti-capitalist, how do you support people to unravel? What is the process of unraveling? What does it look like?
Yeah, and again, it's annoying. I don't have a specific, like, I think these questions could really help someone see where in their life they're, I hate using this cliche term, but like out of alignment, because I think the clearer we are on the things that matter to us, the easier it is to decide what is and isn't worth your energy. So if we're chasing every shiny thing in front of us, and I have fallen into that, let me be absolutely clear. I am human. I am living in this world just like you. And there's the allure of the quick fix. There's the allure of the next shiny thing. And, but yeah, I've lost my train of thought. I got excited and distracted myself.
It was
Um,
around supporting people to unravel. So if I have
yes.
been part of a system that has taught me A, B, C,
Mhm,
D, but I'm beginning to realize that's
mhm,
probably not in my best interest, in the interest of those with marginalized
mhm.
identities. How can I begin to unravel? How can I begin to loosen that grip that
Yeah.
essentially has me? Is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you for bringing me back. I got distracted by my own tangent. I think it comes up in conversation for folks. People don't often realize where the the pieces are for them that they are ready to let go of. But a really common example is the way that we organize our time. I think that's something that a lot of folks will be able to relate to. So, patriarchy and capitalism are deeply interrelated. Like, there's many folks who actually argue that the nuclear family as we know it was set up to create more surplus labor. So if a woman was unpaid in the household during the Industrial Revolution, she could make more labor the for the system, and could also ensure that those around her, her husband, was fed and taken care of so that he could make as much money for the capitalist business owners at the time, which is wild. So the 9 to 5 business work week, as we know it, is actually also set up around the male hormonal cycle. So it is set to maximize profit around, because men go through the same cycle in a day that women go through in a month. And I understand that there are also all sorts of other gender identities within that. But yeah, so recognizing that the natural world around us is set to other cycles, and how can we live more connected with our own cycles, and with, like, also just going outside like is really being in nature if you have it available to you, whether it's like a patch of grass in your garden, or like, I feel very lucky, I live in a very wild corner of the west coast of Ireland, so like being in nature helps me remember to get out of my head and back into my body and reconnect to these natural rhythms. But we are of nature, even though our world tells us we're above it. So I think that's really interesting. But yeah, just like, what's your time? How can you reconnect to the value of your time? How can you organize your time in a way that makes sense for you?
It's
So, and it's different for every person.
It
Like,
is
some
different
people,
for everyone. And what is
mhm,
interesting as I hear you speak, Stephanie, is it goes back to the systems that we are a part of, the
mhm,
education system that we are a part of,
absolutely.
how we were taught, what time we were meant to
Mhm,
be in school, what time we left school, the extracurricular activities that we were a part of,
mhm.
the subjects that allowed you to
Prioritized.
prioritized, but if you got into them and were really good, paid more.
Yes.
They paid more. We know that the sciences paid more, STEM, the
Mm-hmm.
arts. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of people, students being encouraged, that is a path to take. And if you're not strong in that area, what a lost cause, so to speak. I mean, from where I
Mm-hmm.
come from, I know there was such a focus on education, particularly when
Absolutely.
you come from a continent where your identity, a lot of the times from the Western lens, is one of poverty. And so you've spent a lot of time trying to prove yourself, trying to unravel from colonialism and prove that you have something to offer. And so education has been the pathway to making something of yourself. And so being strong in certain areas certainly does have that advantage. And now, as you share and as you speak, it brings me back to some of the work that we did inside of Represented, which was the question that I always ask when you think of whatever you're building as a business owner, putting offers together, or even part of the groups that you are, or the organizations that you are, the table that you belong to, either the corporate table. Who was it built for? Who built it? Who was it built for? Who did they have in mind when they created it? And a lot of times when you're able to answer those questions for yourself, it often shows you who they didn't have in mind. So when you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about the 9 to 5 and how that has been linked to the cycle of how men work, how you can get the most out of them. Yeah, so when that work structure was created, who was it created
Mm-hmm.
for in mind? And,
Mm-hmm.
and when we try to be ourselves, bringing yourself as
Mm-hmm.
a woman, and you're not fitting into those boxes that have been put in place, and you feel like there's something wrong,
Mm-hmm.
you feel like you're less than, and then you have the
Mm-hmm.
mental health crisis that we're going
Mm-hmm.
through, everybody in
Yeah.
different ways, because there are systems that have been built, and when they were built, they didn't have certain people in mind. And so
Mm-hmm.
those systems were built specifically for certain people, and that's why certain people thrive and others
Mm-hmm.
struggle.
Mm-hmm. Massively. Yes. Yes, 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 to all of it, 100 times over. There's a beautiful quote, and I was just going to try and look for it, but I can send you it's from after with the correct words. But it's no measure of success to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And it's something that I often remind my clients of, because right now we define success as fitting into these molds that you said weren't built for most people. Like they weren't designed in that way.
Mhm.
And the other thing that was coming up that I guess is like a core of what I support folks with is capitalism in many ways turns us into machines of production. And a lot of my work tries to bring the humanity back in. So, like, where can we make space for the messiness of being alive, of being human, of making mistakes? And I really, as I was thinking about our conversation today before I arrived to it, I think that's one of the things that you do exceptionally well within your program, Annie. Like, you take the pressure of being perfect away from the get-go, and you're like, there's space to be messy, there's space to be human, there's space to ask questions that you might think are silly, but you hold it with integrity. So there's still, it's like we don't get rid of everything, but what are the pillars that we're upholding around these containers? And that in my own way is what I try to create in my coaching spaces, and what I try to remind people they can create in pockets of their own lives, right? Like what is within their influence. So how can we shift the inherent competition, the inherent scarcity into communities of care, into places of compassion, into, like, you know, the messiness of being human? Because I don't know about you, but most of the really important learning moments in my life have come from getting something wrong. But that's not what we're taught, right?
I can see where now, I read one of your posts where you wrote perfection is a capitalism illusion. And I know that perfection is also something that is linked to white supremacy as well. And so I'm beginning to see the correlation between capitalism and racism, and how the
Mm,
two can really fuel each other and
mhm,
literally work hand in hand. When you put
mhm.
all these systems, even the patriarchy, when you put
Yeah,
all the ableism, they work hand in
absolutely.
hand to empower a certain group and
Very
continue
simple.
to marginalize and
Mhm,
alienate. And the gap grows just bigger and bigger and bigger. Those who
mhm,
are at the top have more
mhm,
authority, have more money, have
mhm,
more power, and those who do
mhm,
not, it goes from bad to worse. And
mhm,
so I'd be interested to
mhm.
know, and I don't know if I framed this question in the best way.
It's okay. We'll figure it out.
Are there any good parts to capitalism, or does the bad outweigh the good? And the reason why I ask this question is I think of a business that is profitable and they're able to then take those profits and throw them into areas that are needed. Those marginalized communities
Yeah,
need the funding into causes that are actually
yeah,
making a profound difference. We
yeah.
still do need those businesses that are incredibly
Mhm,
successful, that have the financial power, because when you have
mhm.
finances, you have power and you're able to
Absolutely.
choose where you put that
Mhm,
support, where you throw your support. And it's even tied to the people we end up voting for, the people who we
mhm,
end up electing into office. So
mhm,
having
mhm,
that part, which I guess to some degree comes from capitalism, is it all
mhm.
bad? Does the bad
Yeah.
outweigh the good? What are your thoughts?
So, love this question. I think there's almost two answers. Right now, I want people to have money, which is power in this system, who are going to invest it in things that matter, who are going to look after um, people who are in positions that have been marginalized and support and empower them. But my critique is that capitalism has been part of creating that marginalization. So taking the money made in a system that has not directly related in any way, but putting it back towards communities that have been disenfranchised, that have been alienated, that have been like capitalism is part of creating that problem. Like the extraction of resources from all over Africa, like the continent of Africa, like the there's nothing inherently impoverished about certain countries. It's like go to the museums in London and look at why like it is that way.
Mhm.
So like I I'm opening a huge other can of worms with that statement, but I think it's important to say like nobody is inherently poor. It's not a personality trait. It's not a thing that somebody has done wrong. It is the conditions that they are living in that have created it. And I think part of those conditions are capitalism. So what so I do not think there is good to capitalism, but I do think that there is a significant difference that money and power in the hands of people who care about the collective is very important for this moment. Like,
Mm.
does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I love the way you said it's not an identity. It's not something that is inherent. It's something that it's a cause of,
Yeah.
what has been done. And so yes, it absolutely makes sense. And so I want to ask the last question here. And
The
I almost
last
feel like
question.
before I do that, I'd love to know, who are the people who come to work with you? Who are the people who go like,
Mm.
I'm coming to you because I need X support from you? Who are those people?
Yes. So for the most part, up until now, it has been people who work in change work or in care work. So people who give a lot of themselves to others around them, nonprofit workers, education, folks who work in education, and sometimes people who just like give a lot of their volunteer time on the side and have felt maybe some dissonance between what they want for themselves and what they want for the world and haven't been able to line that up in a way that feels empowering or supportive for them moving forward. But increasingly, I'm exploring how I can support other business owners to use their business as a vehicle for change and to create a definition of success for themselves that expands beyond their own business. So yeah, we'll see. Time will tell how it grows and evolves.
Beautiful. So, last question, Steph. If fear was not a factor, how would you show up in your work?
Oh, that's beautiful. How would I show up in my work? I love what I'm doing. Like, it's such a lovely way to say that already. I think I would have introduced the work I'm going to do with business owners differently just there. I am supporting business owners to be anti-capitalist in their business. Yeah, that's what it is. I would have stepped into that in a way that honors the experience and the expertise I have to share in this area. And I think it's so interesting that I continue to have to unravel from this idea myself of what it is to be an expert in an area. I constantly am comparing myself to the incredible academics and professors that I had the privilege of learning from in my graduate education, and recognizing that I am not in academia. I am not in the business of knowledge production. I am taking what I learned from that time and bringing it into life and bringing it into other folks who wouldn't have naturally been exposed to it. So yeah, that's what I would do. Thank you for that.
Awesome. So, where can people find you if they want to connect with you? Where do you spend most of your time? Where can they connect with you?
Yeah, I hang out on Instagram at Steph Milo Mac is the handle there. And then I made a really handy link at stephaniemackinnon.com. So STEPHANIE, God, it's so long. MACKINNON.com/freebie is where you can actually find the reflection questions I was talking about there around aligning your definition of success with what actually matters to you.
Beautiful. And all of that will be on the show notes. Stephanie, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you.
My absolute pleasure. It was so wonderful to reconnect with you and really just delve that bit deeper into how the worlds we work in really do interconnect and overlap. And yeah, it gives me hope, which is exciting.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented.